Monofilament longlining in the Pacific for pelagic species has been around for approximately 20 years. The introduction of monofilament longlining in the Hawaii region took place in 1984 with the introduction of Lindgren-Pitman, or commonly known as LP, monofilament longline equipment that was developed for East Coast swordfish and tuna fisheries in the late 70s. The advantages of monofilament longlining versus traditional rope type gear methods are many. The crew technical expertise and staffing, or number of men it takes to run a significant amount of gear, is much less with monofilament longlining than with traditional rope type gears. Typical boats in the 20 to 30 meter range in length, operating in the mid-Pacific region, run between 2,000 and 3,500 hooks per day using a crew of 4 or 5 men. Catch rates have proven to be equal to or better than traditional longlining methods used in the past by most Asian fisheries. And the advantages of smaller vessels, more economical to operate with less crew requirements, has proven to be a significant advantage. The LP provided hydraulic power pack is available if electric power availability is such that there is plenty of electrical power available for the 20 horsepower electric motor. The electric contactor is used to turn on and off the electric hydraulic power pack, and the working ports which go to the reel and the adjustable relief valve are easily installed to provide sources of hydraulic power for the reel. The hydraulic power pack contains a return line filter with a gauge, a vented fill cap, the tank having approximately a 35-gallon capacity. An oil cooler may be necessary to keep the oil within the operating ranges, and ports are available for installing return lines from the equipment, as well as an adjustable relief which can be preset by the operator when necessary. Rotation is critical of the electric motor. As these are three-phase motors, rotation is reversible, and this demonstrates how the remote control of the hydraulic control valve is activated. This unit is skid mounted, and if space is available, provides the easiest and quickest installation with the proper hydraulic requirements for the equipment. The installation of Lindgren-Pitman monofilament longline equipment, or LP equipment, is the advantages are many, in that the equipment can be located in various locations around the vessel that provide for the most efficient use of deck space on smaller vessels particularly. This video will demonstrate a few of the ideas that have been incorporated over the years in locating, positioning, installing longline fishing equipment. The way the reel is being hoisted in this section is the proper way, with two slings around the reel and choked going up to the lifting eye of the crane, so the reel is picked up in a horizontal position. The approximate weight of the reel with monofilament, as you see here, is about 3,400 pounds. This section demonstrates the locating of the reel upon some pre-existing mounts that were previously welded to the steel deck of the vessel. And it's important to note that an insulator of rubber, plastic, or some other material to isolate the reel feet from the mounting pads is important, otherwise corrosion will develop and deteriorate the aluminum frame. The LS3 or LS4 line shooter located on the stern of the vessel is used to deploy the line into the water during the setting. The LS3, LS4 line shooter has two controls, one of which turns the equipment off and on, the other of which is a speed control. Typically the speed control is set for the vessel in their normal setting speed, and the on-off control is then used to start the shooter and stop the shooter during the setting operation. The feeding of the line into the LS3 is relatively easy and results in the line being grabbed between the rubber wheels, which provides the friction for pulling the line off of the reel. Routing the line to the line shooter from the reel can be done in many different ways depending on reel and shooter location. And routing line into the LP Super Spool 3 can be done in many different methods as well. It is not critical that the line is fed directly into the center of the reel, and is actually preferable that the line goes into the reel at something slightly off of center, as this makes for a more uniform coiling of the line on the reel. As you can see, the deck space required for all the equipment is relatively small, and much of the working space is retained for the handling of fish and of retrieving the leaders. When retrieving the line, the level line must be engaged by installing the flexible and adjustable link belt and the line being fed through the guide rollers. The KYB motor has 4 hydraulic lines associated with it. The line on top is a K-strain that should return directly to the hydraulic tank and not be teed into any existing return lines. The 2 working ports on the left-hand side of the reel, as depicted in this view, are what drive the reel forward and backward, and the pilot line is connected to the LS3 or LS4 line shooter to tie the equipment together and provide braking in the setting mode. The yellow-handled ball valve located on the reel manifold is used for setting line and also for free spooling the reel when servicing is required. The dual selector valve, as demonstrated, is used when there's more than one piece of hydraulic equipment. The hydraulic piping typically is 3/4 inch or approximately 22 millimeter piping, and the control for the reel is a typical brand Morris valve located in the engine room and a remote control cable operating it from the working deck. The sources of hydraulic power can be many, and this view demonstrates hydraulic power being provided from a power takeoff on a generator through a relief valve with a pressure gauge and a control valve. This is a view of the hydraulic power source driving a hydraulic pump providing 12 to 16 gallons per minute, 2,000 psi. We found that a clean, simple, well-maintained engine working space provides a good working platform for vessels where high maintenance standards result in higher catch rates and less trouble for the captain and crew during their fishing campaigns. It's not uncommon for vessels to mount the reel on a top deck well out of the way of the working space, as the direct interaction with the reel is minimal during the setting and hauling operations, and it may be more convenient to locate the reel in a out-of-the-way location. Oftentimes schooner-style vessels mount the reel in front of the house, facing forward. Reels are not always mounted midship. They are sometimes mounted either on the port or starboard side, fore and aft, or thwartships, depending on the vessel size and deck layout. Any of these types of installations can prove to be successful, and there are many different types of installations. The empty weight of the Super Spool 3 is approximately 1,700 pounds and can sometimes be handled by smaller equipment if the monofilament is not included. Oftentimes, to avoid the risk of damaging the somewhat fragile level line, it's removed as the reel is installed and reinstalled after the reel is positioned and located on board the vessel. Here we demonstrate the LS4 line shooter, which deploys the line from the Lindgren-Pitman monofilament long line reel into the water by pulling the line off the reel in the setting operation and deploying the line into the water at a speed faster than vessel speed, therefore providing slack in the main line to achieve the desired depth for targeting certain species. Tools required for the servicing of the LS3 or LS4 line shooter are a rubber mallet, an 1.5-inch socket with a torque wrench for the removal and installation of the trans-torque, prying equipment to put the rubber belt over the main drive wheel, and a pin that would allow us to lock the wheel through the main frame of the LS3 or 4. Service and maintenance of the LS3 or LS4 line shooter is quite easy, and I would like to demonstrate some of the maintenance procedures required with changing the drive wheel, the push roller, and actually removing the main drive wheel so a hydraulic shaft motor seal can be replaced without removing the motor from the line shooter. First, to remove the rubber drive belt, install some kind of a spike device through the hole located in the front and lined up with the hole in the frame of the LS4. That then holds the wheel from being able to rotate in either direction. By then taking a large screwdriver, AJ is going to have to humor me for a minute because this is a pain in the rear. With the wheel locked, forcing a large screwdriver underneath the drive wheel, it can then be pried off using additional tools. Once the drive belt is removed, note that the drive belt can be turned inside out and reinstalled so it may be used twice. Indication that the drive belt needs to be replaced is when the groove becomes so deep between the upper idler wheel and the drive wheel that the line begins to slip during the setting operation. It's also important to note that the drive wheel is tapered, and the installation of the drive belt is to put the wider side of the drive belt. As you see, this width is narrower than this width. Because the drive wheel and the drive belt are both tapered, it's important that the wide side of the drive belt always be installed facing out from the LS4. To remove the drive wheel, again, it's necessary to insert the peg to keep the wheel from rotating. Then, by taking a 1.5-inch socket and putting it on the trans torque, you're able to loosen the trans torque, which allows you to pull the wheel off. It will feel like it gets tighter again, and the process is to just continue to loosen the trans torque, and it will release the wheel from the shaft. And then by pulling the main drive wheel off the motor shaft, being careful as the trans torque is not attached to the main drive wheel and may fall out, hopefully not over the side. The trans torque simply provides a very tight friction fit for the drive wheel to the motor shaft. After the drive wheel has been removed, it's easy to replace the motor shaft seal by removing the snap ring with a pair of snap ring pliers, prying out the old seal with a sharp prying instrument, and simply installing the new seal and replacing the snap ring. To reinstall the main drive wheel, install the trans torque in the main drive wheel, refit the main drive wheel to the motor shaft, and take two flat items approximately 1/32 of an inch thick and lay them between the drive wheel and the LS4 frame before tightening. Then retighten the trans torque to approximately 120 foot-pounds of torque, and the replacement is complete. Then remove the spacers from behind the wheel. After reinstallation, make sure that the reel turns freely and is not rubbing against the frame of the LS4. At that point, reinstalling the drive belt is accomplished. Occasionally, servicing of the upper idler wheel here, which provides tension for holding the line onto the drive belt, is required. It's common practice to take either a file or a Marlin bill, and while the LS4 is running, use the Marlin bill or file to round the face of the upper idler wheel to remove any grooves that may wear over time. The operation of the LS4 when installed aboard the vessel is quite simple. The control of the line shooter is done via two control valves. The valve located on top of the uniblock is the on-off valve. The one on the side of the uniblock is the speed control, which allows the operator to vary the speed of the line to control the line depth as it's deployed into the water. On the installation of the LS3 or 4 line shooter, it's important that the drive lines be hooked up in the proper sequence. Otherwise, a failure of the motor will occur. As you see, for the installation of the 2 hydraulic lines to drive the LS3 or LS4 line shooter, cast into the frame are clearly labeled instructions for which port is in and which port is out on the hydraulic lines. The other installation of a hydraulic line consists of a line from the LS3 or LS4 line shooter to the uniblock on the reel to the port labeled sense, and that provides the sequencing of the hydraulic system between the reel and the shooter during line setting. Tension for gripping the line on the line shooter is provided by 2 tension O-rings located on the back of the shooter. They may wear and require replacement at times to ensure that the line is properly gripped. They may wear and require replacement so the line is properly gripped when line is being set. Today we are going to demonstrate some of the maintenance features on the Lindgren-Pitman Generation 3 Super Spool. We have here today a 40-inch by 80-inch third generation spool that is the largest spool currently manufactured in the world dedicated to monofilament longlining. Tools required for servicing the Lindgren-Pitman monofilament longline reels are 1 1/4, 7/8, 3/8, 11/16, 5/8, and 9/16 end wrenches, 5/32 Allen wrench, various sockets and a drive, a hammer, wood wedges, grease gun with multi-purpose grease. This mechanism is called the level wind with the diamond cut bar, which is what actually moves the level wind guide roller back and forth. So this whole apparatus is the level wind. We are going to demonstrate adjusting the level wind up and down, and the reason to adjust the level wind would be to accommodate various positions of the lead-in block, and will accommodate better spooling the line on the drum itself. To adjust the level wind, there are actually several different positions as well as slotted holes, and we will adjust the level wind to its maximum down position now. We'll do that by loosening 2 bolts on each side of the level wind where it attaches to the frame of the reel, and relocating the level wind in a lower position and then reinserting the bolts. The level wind is used to evenly distribute the line across the length of the spool. In this case, the spool is 80 inches long, and the level wind is used to evenly apply the line over the 80 inches as you are either setting or retrieving the line. I have now repositioned the bolts into different threaded part of the frame so that the level line is in a much lower position, which may accommodate different lead-in rollers when the line is being retrieved. The level wind is not used typically when you're setting. The belt is removed from the level line, which I'll demonstrate, and the guide roller is moved off to the side, and the line comes off the reel freely without any influence from the level line. And that was in the setting position. When you are feeding the line into the reel, it is fed through the guide roller assembly onto the reel, the level wind evenly distributing the line across the reel. When you're setting, depending upon the block position for the first block coming off of the reel, depending upon the location of the first block as the line exits the reel, it may be advantageous to have the entire assembly higher or lower to accommodate different positions of that block when the line is actually being deployed through the line shooter. And that completes the adjustment of the level wind height. Guide roller assembly is the actual guiding of the line onto the core of the reel in the retrieve operation. And the guide roller assembly positioning is very important to maintain even levels of the line throughout the range of the width of the reel. For example, if you had a situation where as the line neared the end of the core, it went down slightly, that might mean that the adjustment of the guide roller assembly is necessary to more evenly distribute the line all the way to the end plates. The adjustment of the guide roller assembly is simply done with two cap screws that are located on the face of the guide roller assembly. And to adjust it, I'll demonstrate what it looks like inside. As you can see, there are three holes in the double bar guide where the guide roller assembly is attached. Depending upon how the line feeds across the reel, it may be necessary to make adjustments either within the range of the slotted holes or actually using one of the third holes, but all three holes are not necessarily used for the proper operation of the guide roller assembly. The only way to determine where the guide roller assembly should be positioned is by visually inspecting the line as it spools onto the core of the reel to make sure that it's evenly spaced with no high or low spots on either end. Minor adjustments can be made simply by loosening the two cap screws and moving the guide roller assembly to the proper position. If major adjustments are required, relocating one of the bolts to a different hole may be necessary. And then securely tighten, being careful not to over tighten as you are tightening only into aluminum castings. The guide roller assembly is made up of four rollers. Two rollers will guide the line laterally, and two rollers will guide the line vertically. It's common that one or more of the roller assemblies may not come in contact with the line on many occasions. The next item to demonstrate is the location of the level wind pawl. The line level pawl is a wear item that is located inside of the double bar guide and is used to track the double bar guide along the diamond cut plate in the level wind bar. It is a wear item that will be required to be replaced on occasion. The way of determining if the level wind pawl may need replacing is if the level wind appears to actually stop or hesitate during the hauling operation, that may indicate that the level wind pawl has worn enough that it requires replacing. However, it's usually a gradual wearing of the level wind pawl, and sometimes just going to the guide roller assembly and actually giving it a bump or a nudge will begin the process so that an individual could complete his set or his trip if for some reason he doesn't carry a spare. We are now opening what's called the double bar guide. This is used to attach the guide roller assembly to the level wind bar, and inside is a level wind pawl, which is a wear item that may require replacement occasionally and provides the mechanism with which the line is evenly distributed across the spool. To remove the level wind pawl, simply loosen the 4 cap screws and remove the split double bar guide, and inside you'll see a small stainless steel crescent cylinder that is actually the tracking mechanism that fits into the slot on the double bar on the diamond cut shaft and tracks the level wind assembly across the length of the reel. Simply remove the pawl. If it appears to be worn, it's time for a replacement. It's easily replaced by reinserting it and reassembly, reversing the process.
Before you reassemble that, can you pull that back out so you can...
The installation of the 12-inch V-groove pulley is required on the level wind shaft and is driven by the main shaft of the reel and provides the mechanically driven operation of the level wind. To install the 12-inch V-groove pulley, it simply slips over the end of the level wind shaft, noting that it is lined up fairly well with the V-groove in the main reel shaft, and simply tightening the Allen set screw once it's located properly. After installation of the 12-inch V-groove pulley, the installation of the adjustable link belt is accomplished simply by putting the link belt over the main reel shaft and putting it on top of the 12-inch V-groove level wind pulley and rotating the drum until the belt snaps into place. The belt is only used during the retrieval of the line and is to be removed when line is being set or deployed. To remove it, simply pull the belt slightly off the pulley, again rotating the reel, and the belt comes off and is stowed until the line is retrieved. The level wind end bearing assembly is installed to provide a smooth rotation of the level wind diamond cut shaft and has a significant useful life. However, if replacement is required, simply loosening 2 Allen head set screws and 2 cap bolts and removing the assembly from the shaft and replacing with a similar or comparable bearing will accomplish replacement of the end bearing. The heavy-duty end bearing located on the frame opposite the motor side of the reel is a replaceable bearing, and depending on the condition of the housing, it may not be necessary to replace the entire bearing and housing assembly, but only the roller bearings. To do that, the cap, the bearing is a split type bearing, and the cap can be removed. The cap is removed. The cap and the pedestal may be reusable, and the bearing assembly itself can be removed from the shaft by bracing the reel with wood wedges, as will be demonstrated later, removing the keeper collar by releasing 2 set screws, and simply sliding the bearing assembly off of the main shaft. If the entire bearing assembly requires replacing, simply remove the 2 cap screws, bolted through with lock nuts on the other side. Again, prop the reel up with the wood wedges, remove the bearing off the shaft, replace, making sure that the plastic insulator between the pedestal of the bearing and the reel frame is installed to alleviate chances of corrosion. First, I'm going to demonstrate the removal of the ball valve, which bypasses the hydraulic circuit for free spooling the reel. The reason that you may want to remove the ball valve is at times the ball valve seat may become worn, and the reel may not stop or start properly, and this may be caused by hydraulic fluid bypassing the ball valve slightly. And if a customer indicates that the reel will pay line out even in the stop position, it may indicate that the ball valve seat is worn. To test the ball valve, simply remove the 2 swivel nuts on either end, and notice that if you blow through the line with the ball valve open, air goes through freely. If the ball valve is closed, there should be no air that passes. And also a unique trait is that you must test the ball valve seat in both directions, because although it may indicate that the seat is tight in one direction, it may not be tight in the other direction. So blowing through both ends and activating the valve in the open and closed position is required. On occasion, particularly in new installations, the reel and the hydraulic functions may not operate in synchronization. We found that oftentimes during new installations, contamination from new pipe and hose installations, as well as new plumbing and hydraulic pumps, may contribute to this problem. It may be necessary to remove the cartridges from the uniblock and inspect them for any foreign debris located within the cartridge bed. This can be done very simply, but it's very important to ensure the cleanliness of all the cartridges as they're reinstalled. To remove what's called the counterbalance, which is the primary cartridge for synchronizing the reel and the line shooter, a 1 1/4 inch wrench simply put on the outside and turned will remove the cartridge. After removing the cartridge, to inspect for foreign debris, it's important to look very closely, as the debris may be hard to locate or may not exist at all. After ensuring that there is no foreign debris obstructing the operation and function of the cartridge, it's important to carefully reinstall the cartridge, making sure that all the O-rings which provide seats for the hydraulic oil, are intact. Securing of all of the cartridges is done simply by a slight tug after the cartridge is seated, using caution not to over-tighten as the cartridge block is aluminum and can easily be damaged by over-tightening. In addition to the counterbalance cartridge, which synchronizes the shooter and the reel during the setting operation, what's called stop cartridge is located on the bottom of the uniblock. To remove the motor from the reel for servicing, two wood wedges are required to be inserted between the reel and the frame to support the weight as the motor is removed. Once the wood wedges have been installed securely, the removal of the uniblock is the easiest way to commence with removing of the motor. The K-strain line between the motor and the uniblock must be removed prior to the removal of the uniblock from the motor itself. To do that, loosening both ends of the K-strain line allows for easy removal. It's a good idea to keep a bucket or some absorbent pads underneath the motor as the uniblock is removed, as it is filled with hydraulic oil and there is no way of retaining that hydraulic oil. On the underside of the uniblock, there are 8 bolts that secure the uniblock to the motor housing. The removal of the 8 bolts will allow the uniblock to be removed from the motor without having to remove all of the hydraulic hoses that are connected to the uniblock. Therefore, it's much easier to remove the uniblock with the hoses still attached, laid in the bucket until time for reinstallation. To remove the motor, first, removing the K-strain is required, and also removal of the hydraulic fitting adapter before the bolts attaching the motor to the frame can be removed. 5 3/4-inch nuts attach the motor to the frame. And removal of the fitting with normally the hose attached for the K-strain of the motor is also required. After the 5 nuts have been removed and the hydraulic fittings have been removed, the motor can be slid out of the motor coupling. The motor drives the reel through a flexible coupling called an F2 hub, and the receptacle mounted inside the reel is called the F2 sleeve. At times, the flexible coupling can wear and may require replacing. To replace the F2 hub on the motor shaft, removing the grease that has accumulated, then removing the cap screw and keeper which holds the key in place is required, and 2 Allen head set screws in the coupling must be loosened before the motor can be pulled using a standard gear or wheel puller. It's important to note that the F2 hub at the factory is installed extremely tight, and some heat may be required to remove the hub from the motor shaft. Being careful that if heat is used, most likely the seal in the motor shaft will also require replacing. The F2 sleeve, which is installed in the reel, is specially machined to accept a grease fitting. The grease fitting allows grease to be injected into the F2 hub and sleeve assembly, therefore pushing out corrosive salt water that may penetrate as the reel is commonly used. The F2 sleeve should need to be replaced process for replacing is remove the 10 bolts that are tapped into the core of the reel and insert 3 of those same bolts into the 3 jacking holes and evenly tighten, which will push the F2 sleeve out of the core of the reel. Also, it's important to note the plastic insulator that is used between the motor and the reel frame to ensure that corrosion does not take place between the dissimilar metals. It's important to make sure that the wedges remain in place and secure when the motor is removed, as the motor acts as the bearing on the drive end, and if the wedges are removed, the core will drop out of alignment. To reinstall the motor, you simply reverse the process, making sure that the orientation of the case drains are the same as when the motor was removed. It's important that as the motor is reinstalled, the 5 mounting bolts are tightened uniformly as the motor must be lined up properly with the reel. When reinstalling the uniblock, it's important to make sure that the surface is clean and free of debris and that the O-rings providing the seal between the motor and the uniblock are clean and intact. When installing the 8 bolts securing the uniblock to the motor, it's important that all 8 bolts get started first by hand before tightening, and again tightening the bolts in a uniform sequence will ensure proper seat of the hydraulic O-rings. Making sure that all the fittings are tight and reinstalling the case drain between the motor and the uniblock will complete the reinstallation of the motor. Remember to tighten both ends. There are 4 lines to connect the reel to the hydraulic system. The case drain located on the top of the motor should be routed with the hydraulic hose directly back to tank. The case drain is not a pressure line, but it must be routed directly to the tank, and if it is routed in conjunction with other pressure-related hydraulic lines, it will result in the motor failing. The 2 working ports or drive ports located on the uniblock are the primary connections and provide the fluid to drive the motor in either direction. To reverse the direction of the reel as it's controlled by the control valve, the 2 working ports located on the side of the uniblock can be reversed. The 2 hoses can be reversed, and that will reverse the direction of the reel as activated by the control valve. It's important to, after the motor has been reinstalled and secured, to remove the wood wedges. And check to make sure by hand rotating the reel that it appears to be smooth and in balance. The counterbalance located in the side of the uniblock provides an adjustment as to the tension between the reel in the setting mode and the line shooter. It acts very much like a drag in a fishing reel. At the factory, the counterbalance is preset to the approximate setting that will provide the smoothest and most consistent operation. However, if adjusting the counterbalance is necessary, a 9/16 wrench loosening the lock nut and a 5/32 Allen wrench inserted into the Allen head will provide an opportunity to adjust the reel. The typical factory setting is with the Allen wrench adjustment all the way counterclockwise, 2 turns clockwise as a general rule is a good place to start. After that adjustment is made, it's important to retighten the lock nut. The installation of the reel and the actual attachment of the reel on board the vessel can be done many ways. The foot of the reel oftentimes is mounted onto a piece of channel iron which is welded or otherwise attached to the deck of the vessel. Although distributing the weight through the entire range of the foot on each side is not required, spanning a distance so that the weight is distributed over a large area is preferable. I'd like to take a moment to demonstrate the service requirements of the reel that are done on a somewhat routine basis. Located between the ribs on the core of the reel on the motor end is a grease fitting which provides grease to the F2 hub and sleeve coupling between the motor and the reel. The grease requirements of this particular item are somewhat low, and a greasing schedule of once per trip is adequate. Typically, there is grease within the F2 hub, and installing your grease gun and injecting approximately a half a tube of grease should push out the moisture and refreshen the lubricating properties. As grease is injected into the hub, you may see grease come out between the reel frame and the core of the reel. That's normal and should be cleaned up so it does not come in contact with the other equipment or the line. Another grease servicing item are the bearings for the level lined assembly, and simply once a trip, 1 or 2 squirts of a multi-purpose grease will suffice. The heavy-duty end bearing should also be greased once per trip and is accomplished by removing the cap, installing the grease gun, and injecting a multi-purpose grease, being careful not to over-grease as it may damage the bearing seals. Other grease fittings on the guide roller assembly require greasing as necessary, and to accomplish that, simply install the grease gun, and usually 2 to 3 squirts per roller are adequate, as over-greasing will deposit excess grease on the rollers which may come in contact with the line and create further problems in the future. Lubrication of the bar guide can be done simply by applying grease with the hand around the entire bar guide. In addition, every 2 to 3 months it's recommended that the level line be removed and the grease be cleaned off with an adequate degreaser or diesel oil, and new grease is installed to remove the contaminated grease from the equipment. And that's what it takes to maintain your Lindgren-Pitman monofilament longline system. It's important to remember that routine maintenance of your fishing equipment as well as your vessel will provide years of service and successful fishing campaigns. Thank you and good fishing.